It's the Friendly Fire Show, episode 226 for the start of February or something like that, 2023. That was something I almost screwed up. My name is Steve Wright. I'm coming to you live from my co-host Ben Salter's spare bedroom / office / podcast recording studio.
That's right, yeah. We should probably put up some like foam padding or something, but no need. Normally we don't have two people in here, so we've jammed into a small space. This is our first in real life episode since, I don't even know.
Forever?
Certainly pre-COVID. Maybe like back in our old style, back when we used to have like 5 people and we're in like an office building with a fancy mixing deck and all that.
Well, and we've certainly gone a little bit, less high-tech from the mixing deck and proper mics and stuff, but a little bit more high-tech from 4 of us potentially at E3 trying to crowd around one blue microphone. We've got 2 microphones. We're talking into one each. We're making eye contact instead of looking through a screen at each other, and it's slightly off-putting. I don't know why, though. I've had the best weekend in Adelaide hanging out with you. I haven't even said hello to you properly. Hi, Ben Salter.
We're back. We're back for 23. We're back weekly as of this week. So we had a little break, a mandated break, because we decided we needed some time off. And there was nothing happening.
Nothing happens in January. That's very quickly starting to change, though, of course. So we've got a bunch to talk about. So it's a good thing we left it for this long. So we had stuff to talk about.
Yeah.
I think I'd be remiss if we didn't start talking about GoldenEye 007 on Xbox, I think is what we've played it on, but it's also on Switch.
Yeah.
Should we get into the weird differences between each version before we jump into our experience?
It's pretty similar. So I think there's 2 sides of people I'm seeing on this, right? There's the people who are disappointed because it's pretty much the 64 game just re-released like 15 years later. And they were kind of wanting more in that we had that 360 game, which was a remaster in like 2008 or something. It's pretty much playable if you know where to look on the internet. But it was never released due to reasons, basically. And then we're seeing the other people, which I think is where we fall in. Like they were pretty honest about that's what you're getting. Like we've been hearing people want to get the old game, the original game as they played it for years now. So that's what we're giving you. Like we're not giving a remaster. We're giving you the old game that just plays a little bit better than it used to. And I think that's what we expected, and that's pretty well what we got. That's what it felt like to me playing. Differences. So like Xbox is 4K, up to 4K if you have a Series X, 1440p if you have a Series S. It runs at a pretty well stable 60 frames per second as opposed to like the 8 frames per second that the N64 version ran at. I think the Switch is the same. I think it's got widescreen as well, but it's only 720p.
Yeah.
And it's, so more stable frame rate. And it, of course, has online play in quotations, online play. It's more split screen online with 4 friends if you invite them into the lobby. So there's no matchmaking. And I think a lot of people who haven't played Nintendo Switch Online 64 games will kind of just see it has online play and think, great, I'm going to play that version. Xbox doesn't have online play. And that's true, but you probably don't understand that it's not real online play. It's very much a Nintendo effort in the online space, and there is no matchmaking, which means there's no playing with randoms. It's literally just the game thinks you're playing with 3 people right next to you, but that's happening over the internet. So you need to invite them in each time you want to play.
And it's been a while since I've done anything in the Nintendo Switch Online multiplayer space, so correct me if I'm wrong. If you want to speak to people whilst you're playing, you either have to like do it yourself and go into a Discord chat anyway, or use, I think, your smartphone and the Nintendo Switch Online app and try to do this weird Frankenstein of...
I think even for Switch Online games, I'm not even sure you can use the app because it's not proper matchmaking. So basically you need to invite 3 other people to play with you. The game will think whoever's done that is the host, like player 1 on an actual console. If they disconnect, the whole game ends because it's as if you're playing on their 64. The game thinks the other 3 people are plugged in next to you, so... On your screen, you will see all 4 screens. It's not just your screen like a current day modern game online. It thinks you're playing split screen. And once you play one game, the game ends and the 3 players disappear. You need to invite them again. There's no lobby. There's no online infrastructure. It's just local multiplayer that's happened to be pushed out over the internet. It's very much a rudimentary, like you could have done this for years on emulators. And that's all they've done. So I feel like Xbox could have done that, but they probably thought, that's not good enough. For people pay for Xbox Live Gold, that's not good enough service. So let's just have a local multiplayer. The game hasn't really been touched beyond that.
Well, and we played it on Xbox. It's part of Rare Replay for free. It's on Xbox Game Pass for free. I'm not even sure you can buy this.
You cannot
as a standalone option.
You can buy Rare Replay. If you own it on disc, you will not get it. You need to have a digital copy. It's like $20 or $30 now. I would recommend doing that because we've seen with previous Bond games when Activision had the license, so this is obviously well before Activision had it. A day came and without any notice, they all just disappeared from sale. Like the license agreement ended. And as much as this has had a very long history over, essentially it's a game that was made by Rare, it was published by Nintendo. Rare is obviously now owned by Microsoft. And the Bond license sits with MGM and Eon, who both run the Bond series. And there's two other people, like I'm sure like Pierce Brosnan is kind of in this game. Technically he is. You can, if you know that's meant to be him, you can kind of see it. I think Sean Bean looks a lot more like him than Pierce Brosnan does in this game.
Alan Cumming looks like Alan Cumming. The guy who looks like Hagrid does not, but I think that's almost on purpose because he's had a bad
Robbie
track
Coltrane.
record.
Yeah. He didn't look great as Hagrid in the PS1 Harry Potter game. He's had a bit of a rough ride in this early generation of 3D games. Old Robbie.
It would take too many polygons to form his true appearance.
Yeah,
they weren't spared. To be able to be spared. Anyway, sorry.
And well, the Rare guys explained that they tried to have this game in Rare Replay in 2015, but it was just they had to have that game out for their 30th anniversary. That was the whole deal. 30 games, 30 years. And they just couldn't get it done. There were too many moving parts, too many different people. This, almost 10 years before that, they tried to remaster it, and it turns out they didn't have the licensing agreement because at that time they also had Activision to deal with, who had the Bond license, who didn't agree. So they ended up making their own GoldenEye game. So they've tried a lot. They finally pretty much agreed that this can now come out. And yeah, that's essentially, it's taken a long time to get here.
It has. And I guess that was, I think I had a point when I was talking about Rare Replay and getting it. And like the Xbox version is exactly what you used to have. So you have to get 4 friends over. You have to use split screen on the same console. We roped in our partners to play alongside us. So there was 4 players. And I think the more game playing of us 4 were immediately able to jump in because it's very modern controls on Xbox. You don't have to go and try to like remap anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Twin stick. You hit the left trigger, you get a little like aiming reticle that you kind of control with the right stick, like you would just think would be normal. And we just were off and running. I think poor Claire had a little bit more difficult of a time. And got it eventually, was running around slapping people.
Did better in slappers only. But yeah, so that's the main difference there. So the Xbox version has by default modern controls, twin sticks. It does break some things in like you can see other players just kind of like sliding along because previously all your movement was done with 1 stick. And so now that it's done with 2, you can kind of move in some directions that you couldn't do before. I never used the aiming reticle on 64. Like it wasn't done. You had to hold down, I think, L or R. L you couldn't even use on the 64 because it was on the 3rd prong, which your hand never used. Yeah. I think it might have been on the right side as well, but it just wasn't really a done thing. Like it has a little auto aim. We weren't really used to first-person shooters, so the concept of holding down like the aim button wasn't really a thing. But having that there now definitely changes how you play a little bit. Like headshots are now kind of in play. The auto aim kind of aims at the torso. Like that wasn't really a thing as much before. So definitely changed. Not the same on 64. Like you have to map it, right? So by default, it's the 1 stick. I think it has an option to let you kind of change that around, but not to the degree that Xbox does. If you're going to play on 64, you're probably better off playing with the N64 online controller as you used to play, but it will hurt your brain.
Well, yeah, so you have a 64 controller. I saw it downstairs because I'm in your house. I don't know if I've said that 5 times today already or not. But I guess you've played a little bit of the multiplayer alongside me. I think you've played the first level. I
played like the first 5 levels of the single player.
Oh, okay.
And I'd probably say that's what I'm looking like. A bit of a hot take. A lot of people were thinking, let's get back to the multiplayer because that's what they remember most. And I think 1 or 2 sessions with... You probably need 4 players who used to play this. Like they have that nostalgic element and a bit of a session. Maybe have another game you can go to because I think you'll hit a point where it's like, that's enough. But I think the single player is more interesting for me. Like it's going through these levels again. It was quite revolutionary. Like why it was known so much is 1, it did first-person shooter on a console well. But like upping the difficulty added in different objectives. It meant that you couldn't just go from A to B to finish the level. That was like the easy mode, but you pushed along further. Yes, the enemies got tougher, but you also had to do more stuff. You had to explore a bit. Like the first 2 levels, I can remember what to do because I would play them like the back of my hand, basically. But later than that, I don't know if I finished them all on like the harder difficulties. I don't think I did because there's a lot of, it's very 90s and it's like you should just know what to do. And it's like, watching the movie kind of helps in that sometimes. Matt mentioned yesterday he saw GoldenEye and he saw Pierce actually do something. It's like, that's what I need to do. Because there's no, like, you fail the mission. If you fail an objective, this happened to me yesterday playing, the plane blew up on like the 3rd or 4th mission and it's just like objective failed. The objective is escape on the plane, but the level doesn't end. It's like, Bond is just going to die now. Games don't really do that anymore.
Well, so are you going to play through it on Xbox and Switch? Or are you going to just, do multiplayer on Switch, like sometimes going back to the retro controls? Like what is your plan, I suppose? You're by far out of the two of us the GoldenEye aficionado.
I think I'll try it a bit on Switch with the original controller, but it hurts my brain too much. I think it's much easier to play on Xbox with proper modern day controls. And I think it runs a little bit better on Xboxes. Both of them have some emulation quirks in that things look a little weird. It's not quite as you remember, but that's also because we're not playing in 240p. We're playing in 4K. So you're going to see some things that look a bit odd because you could just never see that before. But on the whole, I think it looks pretty good for how old this game is. I think it runs really well, and we didn't really have that. Certainly I'm comparing it to the 64 version. I'm sure there are people who are going to say they played it on their fancy beast computer on like an emulator years ago and it ran a bit better there. Comparing just official releases, we have Xbox, Switch, and like 25 years ago, N64.
Yeah.
I think either platform you play on, probably down to the controls, it's worth playing. Probably more so, the single player if you're not familiar with it. I think it's going to be a thing of if you never played it, you want to see what the big deal is, you probably won't get it. Like it's a product of its time.
Yep.
But it still kind of holds up considering how old it is, and a lot of games from that generation don't really. So I think it's one that is still very playable.
Well, and that's the thing about Rare Replay as well, and I'm confused about seeing some people's reactions to GoldenEye because they're like, oh, I expected it to be like polished up, like retextured, this, that, and the other. Like that's never what Rare Replay was about. It was about kind of taking the old game and like making it so it wasn't a complete eyesore. But that's maybe just like resolution and like up-resing what's there, not like remaking something.
Yes,
that's a different expectation that I think you need to keep in your mind. And I know it's not on the list, but I've been playing a lot of Dead Space, which is like a proper remake.
Yeah.
It's a weird one though, and I wanted to talk about it with you quickly just because you love GoldenEye, I love anything survival horror, and like Dead Space was my jam. Resident Evil 2, obviously it is my favorite game of all time. And when the Resident Evil 2 remake came out, it was like my mind exploded. It was a game and a story that I was so familiar with and I knew back to front, presented in a way that I always kind of pictured it being in my brain, but now it was like on the screen and, completely different control scheme. Story was mostly the same, but a couple like twists and turns or additions. Amazing. And like, I think RE2, the remake, was one of my favorite games of that year and maybe got Game of the Year for me or something. I can't remember. But Dead Space is in the same vein, but not. It was made in 2008 and it has all those modern control schemes already built in. There's a lot of refinement that's been done. So like the 0G, for example, you could go from point to point in the original, and in Dead Space 2 and 3, you could actually just fly around. Now you can fly around in the remake. But other than that, it's the same game, the same story, the same structure. A couple things built in, but it's a remake. Like RE2 is a remake, but it's not a changed remake. Does that make sense what I'm even trying to get at first in explaining? Like Final Fantasy VII was a changed remake. It had different gameplay, different presentation.
It's inspired by it, and that's the level of remake that I really like, but it depends what it is. To quickly backtrack, that's not what GoldenEye is. And you're also not paying $110 for it. It's free on 2 subscription services. That was the point I lost track of before that we moved on from. Buy Rare Replay, because at some point, the license for this re-release is just going to end, and I bet you will get no notice, and it just disappears from Game Pass and Switch Online. If you own Rare Replay, as far as we can tell, you should be able to keep it forever.
Just don't uninstall it from your hard drive and make sure you can copy it.
It's like 300 meg. If you need that space, you've got trouble.
Exactly. Sorry to hijack the GoldenEye.
No, we may as well. Yeah, we're done with GoldenEye. It's worth playing. It's free. Like there's no harm in giving it a crack and seeing what it was like. And if you used to like it, I think you'll enjoy playing it again, especially the campaign. If you didn't, you might kind of just see like, oh yeah, I can kind of see why it was a big deal at the time, but I'm not really going to play it now. That's probably the two audiences they're going for. We may as well jump into Dead Space quickly. I was going to say we could talk that next episode.
I just ruined it.
Let's chat. We may as well chat now. That main question is it worth playing for, considering it's kind of similar to The Last of Us Part 1 in that it's not that old. Like, it's not super new, but it's not ancient, and it's like the 360 version is playable on a Series X pretty well. I think it's up-res to 4K. It probably costs you like $10, or it's even on Game Pass.
Yep.
Compared to an $110 remake. Where do you land on that?
If you love it, absolutely buy it and replay it. If you haven't, you almost could just go and play the old one. Like it's essentially the same game. There's a couple extra bits. It's really good. I really like it, but this has kind of made me a little bit less excited for the RE4 remake that's coming in March, because again, you will get to run and gun. That'll be the huge difference in RE4 then and now.
I think that'll be more, because like RE2 is really 4 is like a PS2 and GameCube game. So The Last of Us and Dead Space were both kind of that 360 PS3 generation, that was a pretty big jump there.
Yeah, but the gameplay from RE4 basically was Dead Space running and gunning, and Dead Space Remake was like slight refinements. So we're going to get the slight refinements in RE4, but it was already behind the shoulder camera, kind of like the precursor to what we are playing now in a modern sense. It very much, if you play RE2 remake, it looks more like RE4 than it did RE2. Like I don't know what they're going to do to RE4. Like it'll still be really good, and RE4 is a great game. Hopefully they take out some of the padding and like weird giant statues, unless you're a fan of the really weird stuff that made no sense. But like it'll be closer to the game that you remember playing, not the game that you had in your head. Does that make sense what I'm trying to get at? I don't know. Like I was still excited for Dead Space. I'm still excited for Resident Evil 4. I still think Dead Space is a great game. I can't talk to RE4 yet, but it's a different type of excitement, less hype. If you're a fan of the genre, though, you're still gonna, sink hours and hours and hours into these things. I don't know if I answered your question. Maybe we can come back to it next week. We'll figure out what you want to do. Yeah. Because I've just gone off sheet and ruined it already.
That's fine. It sounds like it's a good game. That's what the people want to know. Dead Space Remake is a good remake.
Yes.
You probably have to be really into it to buy this version compared to the original. If you haven't played either, maybe start with the old version if you're not sure, from a cost point of view, which is the same advice we gave for The Last of Us. So if you're really into it, absolutely worth playing the PS5 version for $125. It's a great game. But if you just want to kind of dabble, you just want to kind of see what it's like, you may as well play the $10 PS4 game, because that's almost as good.
Yeah.
Just a little bit older.
Probably the biggest critique, this game is 15 years old. It has a pretty garbage final boss. And, sometimes when you make a remake and you want to refine things, you should probably change a little bit more than EA Motive did in some areas. And
so
the final boss
very faithful remake.
Is one of those areas.
Did they change up much else without giving any spoilers away?
Not really. There's a lot of extra side stuff, side missions. So, like, the famous Dead Space thing is you hit right stick and he does the little, like, Iron Man's points to the ground and the little, thing shoots out of his hand and shows you where you're supposed to go. I think in the original Dead Space, you basically just followed that, and that's what you did. It was scary and dark and there were monsters all around, but, like, you just kind of forged ahead. And in this case, there's a lot of opportunity to do that, and it, shoots off to the right. So you think, I'm going to go to the left because there's going to be something over there. So it's really good. It adds to the lore without changing anything. RE2 is kind of, it seems like it's taking its own kind of course, and it's starting to contradict the general franchise, even though it's not supposed to. And I think Final Fantasy VII is just doing its own thing, sort of with that in mind, sort of like the Star Trek reboot with like different timelines maybe. But yeah, like this seems like it's just, a director's cut expanded version or something of the original. So if you're at all into Dead Space, you're going to enjoy it. That's me. Shall we move on?
Yeah, that's the other big thing that happened this month was the Xbox finally had a showcase. They showed us what's going on. We hadn't really heard much, so we haven't had a Nintendo Direct for a while. We haven't had a PlayStation State of Play for over a year, I think. And Xbox have kind of had a few showcases, but then they've released nothing. So the point of this one seemed to be, here's all those games that were meant to come out last year, which we delayed into the first half of 2023. Pretty much here's release dates for all of them, except for one of the biggest ones. And the biggest of all wasn't there at all. And I'm glad they said beforehand, Starfield will not be here. It's going to get its own thing because it needs it, because it's such a big game. I do feel like there was probably time for them to put in like a 30-second teaser of kind of like, here's a little bit of Starfield, and that next showcase is going to be on X date.
Yeah, here's the date of the showcase.
Yeah, I feel like they need
the release date for the release date of the announcement of the
Otherwise, I thought it was, so it's a different format for Xbox. There was no people on couches in a green room talking awkwardly and being a bit weird about pizza jokes and things like that, which has been inside Xbox, and terrible format. This was much closer to a Nintendo Direct, but still a bit kind of padded out. So it was hearing from the developers, seeing gameplay,
and called the developer direct, just for
called the developer _ direct. With...
Oh yeah, no, we're not using the underscore. Boo.
And they had some, fancy graphics between, kind of jumping between the developers and the studios. That bit I feel like they could lose. I think that kind of padded out unnecessarily, and it also takes away all the surprises, because it's like, this is the, like, there was no one more thing type element. It was like, this is the 5 studios we're hearing from, and that's it. And you kind of know exactly what they're talking about. There was one surprise that was leaked just beforehand, which was a shadow drop. But we knew we were going to get something like that, because on that screen was Tango Gameworks was going to have something. They've just released Ghostwire Tokyo, so it had to be something else.
So you watched... I didn't even watch it. I'm going to fully admit it. I slept in, and then I just picked up the news later on.
I watched the replay.
When did Tango announce the shadow drop, which we'll get into? I don't know why I'm skirting around the name of it.
At the end of their so they pretty much, the format of it was, it kind of went to the home screen, which had the 4 developers and like faking someone clicking on one of them, and then it would, like, the screen would move around and go to the developer's studio, and they did the classic, you're speaking to camera in front of your studio, and then the cut to the big camera, which is filming the people filming you.
Oh, of course.
Fancy angles. It was okay. I think they just padded it out too much. They needed, it went for 45 minutes. The amount of
5 announcements.
The amount of content they could have had, maybe 30 would have been fine. I think it's good to hear from the developers, but they chatted a little bit too long. I think they needed to get a little bit more to. There was a lot of, especially Forza, was very like, and our most ambitious ever, and our most whatever ever. I think they needed to just be a little bit more. I think they should have not had Forza there, to be honest.
I didn't cover Forza because it just seemed like a wanky, like, it looks like cars look like cars. Well, no offense, Forza, cars always look like cars, and if you're not going to do a release date like you did for literally every other game announced or showcased at the Direct, like, why?
It's much better. It was much better than their previous format. They could tighten it a little. Tango was probably the best in that they had Shinji and the director of what's it called, Hi-Fi Rush, which is a cool little game, and they announced kind of at the end that it's out now and made it pretty clear it's not a demo, it's the actual game is ready to go. And yeah, definitely a fun game worth playing, so probably just check it out. We don't have to say too much about it, in that it's right there for you to play right now. There were no reviews because no one knew this was going to happen. And so certainly you can kind of see they were doing that from a point of view if they wanted to test this format, I think. Is the shadow drop successful? Did
it close out was that the last thing? Even though it wasn't the one last thing, was that the last thing? Because it should have been the last thing.
I think it was. It was a lot. I can't actually remember
because then you want people to get excited and like stop watching your thing, which hopefully it's over, and then go and scramble to download the game, right?
And it was, Shinji was just there basically to have his one line of English and then Japanese kind of saying, we normally make horror games, but we've made something totally different. And then the American guy took over to kind of explain what this game was. And it was probably the game they showed the most gameplay of, to kind of show this is what it is. And I think that was better than too much chat. And then they kind of just went back to them quickly to show that he can speak Japanese too, basically. Which was Shinji, telling him, are you going to tell them the secret? And then it's like, in Japanese, back to Shinji, like, oh, I don't know if we should say. And then like, oh, you should say it's your game. A little bit too much of that still. But then he's kind of like, you can play it today.
Well, that's exactly like the Xbox, inside Xbox banter that we were trying to avoid. But
there's owning a little bit. I think the others were all fine. So the others all announced release dates for like Redfall, and other things that I'm not that keen on personally. Minecraft Legends, something for Elder Scrolls Online.
How long was the Elder Scrolls stuff? Because I don't mean to rag on Elder Scrolls, but even at, like, do you remember any Bethesda showcase at E3 where it was just like, it was going at a pretty good clip, and then it was like, here's the 15 minutes where we just mostly bore everyone to tears about the Elder Scrolls Online.
Yeah, it's probably 10 minutes or so, but it was in the middle, and it was yeah, it was the kill.
Put it at the start to kind of like ramp up from there.
They started with Minecraft, which I kind of get.
Well.
And so they announced dates for all of those. Forza, they didn't, and I kind of feel like it shouldn't have been in there. They just kind of said coming 2023, and people straight away noticed that they'd previously said coming spring 23, and now they're just saying 23, which makes me think it's been delayed out of the first half of the year. And in that case, it shouldn't have been in the showcase, and I kind of agree with that. Yeah. I think it was just a bit lacking in content overall, and that's why they probably should have just had the 30-second teaser of Starfield, and it's going to be shown at the next thing on this date.
Yeah. Well, so Minecraft Legends is April, Redfall is May. Starfield, they've said now that the game is playable from start to end, but they're not sure of a release date yet, so I don't know if that means like it's playable, but it's like in a Bethesda playable mode where like the playtesters are now like losing their minds and they need months/years or something. Who knows?
Yeah, it's hard to know what they like. So it's not going to compete too closely with Redfall, you'd think. But you've also got Zelda coming out in mid-May, so it's got to be 6 weeks clear of that either side. Yeah. I don't think it's coming out kind of March, so probably means it's coming out. If they want to hit this deadline, like last day at like June 30 is the end for them to hit their start of the year goal, I kind of feel like that's the earliest it can release.
Yeah.
And it may push back again.
I think there's a lot of work to be done, like not in terms of development strictly on Starfield, because when they showed it, whenever that was now,
ages ago,
it like I was super excited for it, but like when they were showing it to me, like I kind of lost a lot of that excitement and enthusiasm. Like it just kind of like, oh, it's just like, apart from the shipbuilding stuff and like combining all the things to make your own thing, like it just kind of didn't look, the combat didn't look all that great. It like, you know, No Man's Sky didn't, you know, there's a whole bunch to be said about that in terms of procedurally generated galaxy, but like it just kind of didn't quite make me as excited as I was hoping for. So if Microsoft and Bethesda are doing this single game only developer direct format for Starfield, I think they should really look to what Sony's done with like the God of War one and the New Horizon game, and like really build something to then just, you know, put on YouTube and show people. So like it brings that excitement back. Like, show me why this is taking so long. Show me why it's going to be world changing. Show me why like Todd Howard is, you know, like this is what he's wanted to do for so long. Like, yeah, they almost have to win me back a little bit. So it needs to be a really good presentation, and there definitely needs to be a release date when they decide to roll this out. And they probably need to do the same thing for Forza at this point.
The game beyond that, the game has to be exceptional. It can't be a 8.5 out of 10. It needs to be a 9.5 minimum. Just in that it's been so... Xbox have to hit. When was their last like real big hit? Halo Infinite was disappointing in the end. That was their last game they released.
Arguably, Hi-Fi Rush is their biggest release, but we'll get to that in a second.
So they have released Pentiment and Hi-Fi Rush, which are both really good. But kind of... Maybe they're like A games or B games, really, in that they're not on disc release. They're like $40 each. We're just talking that full release.
Starfield has replaced Master Chief on the back of the Xbox packaging now. So like that said, like we've talked about Halo Infinite and what went wrong.
They need a really successful big hit new IP. It's not as safe as releasing a Halo or a Forza or a Gears of War, the things that they keep leaning on. But like you see PlayStation come out with a bunch of wins with new franchises like Last of Us, and then rebooting God of War and things like that, and they have that big hit, like at least one a year. And Xbox just they can't miss this one, especially delaying it like that was very much we need to make it right. It can't be Bethesda level launch. Like, it needs to be ready to go, fully playable. We can't have a Cyberpunk situation or a Fallout 4 situation where it's like, just give us another year now that it's out and we'll fix it up, and then it'll be good. It needs to be great from day one.
Well, I hope it is, and that's like a testament to what Hi-Fi Rush is, but like it's a completely different game in terms of development and everything else. So I like that we're getting the likes of a Pentiment and a Hi-Fi Rush from these Microsoft studios, but like they're not B games, but you know, they're not AAA. They're not AAA. We'll call them AA or whatever. It doesn't really matter, but you know what I mean. They're not the big huge ones, but they are really cool little like subsets of a team going off to try something. In this case, I think the director's name is Johan something, or John, I think they call him for short, and he did a lot of stuff on Evil Within 2 DLC, and then like to go from like that kind of really like Japanese inspired like body horror survival stuff to like a Jet Set Radio looking rhythm-based
Totally
game.
different.
Like, it's insane. And it's like, it's really fun. I don't know how much of that you've played as yet.
Only dabbled, but it's similar to Pentiment in the style of game that it is, and it's perfect for Game Pass. We often say that, but it's the type. Both of them are type of games you may not have played otherwise, but it's right there. You may as well give it a go. And I think the Shadow Drop is great for that. In the same way that Netflix does that, sometimes they're kind of like, and here's a new season of this show that we didn't really tell you was going to come out right now, and it goes really popular based on that with pretty minimal marketing. It just goes a little viral basically between the communities who are into that type of thing.
Yeah.
And that's the thing with a subscription, right? Like, you're going to have your big Halo and your Starfield, maybe 2 of those a year. But between those, you need to have reasons for people to keep subscribing. And it's those smaller but very successful and popular games like your Hi-Fi Rush that keep people subscribed. And I think Xbox is doing that part of it really well. They're not doing the real big, massive, heavy hitters, your one big show a year that Netflix has that everyone stays
They're
for.
not. Let's be honest.
They need, that's the bit they need to get right.
Yeah.
And that's what Starfield is. And there's nothing else but Starfield. That's the one. And I would even put your Redfalls and your Minecraft Legends, which will probably be really popular, but they're in that filler, like, keep people subscribed category. They're not your subscription sellers.
Yeah.
That's what Starfield's for, and it needs to land.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like Hi-Fi Rush. I like this idea, and it really feeds into the value proposition of Xbox Game Pass, because you need something to keep your level. Like, you could go and use it to download the EA Play 2008 version of Dead Space, but depending on how long you've had the subscription, you've probably already done that. So you need something new and fresh and engaging.
Stuff all the time.
And I can't remember the last time there's been like a shadow drop of a game like this in a while. And the only ones I can kind of think of are going back to like Sony press conferences where it's like the special like teaser demo of RE7, which was like not even, it wasn't the game, it was like a completely different thing where people could download it immediately, and there was all this engagement because there was all these mysteries there and there out, but it was a demo, so anybody could access it. If Sony does that in their own live streams today, they're not going to give you the game. It might release that day, but they're not going to give it to you for free.
No.
So like there's that charge to entry, which is going to take away some people straight away. But this is, anybody that has the subscription can play it immediately. So like there's all this buzz that just comes inherently from that, which is, works in Microsoft's favor, works in the player's favor.
Absolutely. I
So
think
keep releasing more demos like that. It's like those kind of things, like, and you can play it today, are like the fun bits that everybody really gets excited for.
if you listen to this podcast from like 8 years ago, that was always our prediction at E3. There's going to be and this is out now moment, and it rarely happened. You're right. Yeah. It was mainly demos. And I kind of feel like maybe now we're there, and Xbox is really testing this model specifically for Game Pass with Hi-Fi Rush. And I hope they whatever metrics they're looking for, I hope they hit them. And I'm sure they will. I'm sure it's already probably top of the download charts, because there's something, as much as it's great when, a Witcher 3 or something goes to Game Pass and it's already critically acclaimed and well-loved game, I think something that's brand new and it's like, we didn't really know about this and no one's played this and you can all experience it together right now, as you don't have to wait months, is a big move, and it's going to be successful. And
maybe competition begets competition. I know Sony's, right now saying we don't release first-party things straight to subscription because they're these highly funded, money injected, mega, experiences. But, maybe it will get Sony thinking about, letting Bungie spin off a 5-10 person team. I have no idea how many people it needs to make a game, but you know what I mean? To make like a little small thing that isn't a AAA, Destiny thing, but is like a fun little experience that, is on PlayStation Plus Deluxe or Premium.
I think they might decide they want to make that Pentiment Hi-Fi Rush level game, which is not going to be sold at retail, so it's not in that we need to sell X number and ship this amount for $125 each to make our money back. It's a few tiers below that, and maybe they kind of did it with Australia, although that was not really, they just kind of had the rights to it to publish it. Maybe they will.
Nice. Anything else you want to say about the developer direct?
No, that's it.
Cool. So remakes, we've talked about Dead Space, we weren't supposed to. We talked about GoldenEye. We've talked in the past about The Last of Us in various forms. There's a new way to engage with The Last of Us, and that being the HBO Max in America or Binge Foxtel in Australia TV show called The Last of Us. That was the longest sentence ever. We're 2 episodes in. I guess by the time you hear this, it'll be 3 episodes in, but we're not going to really get into too much.
No spoilers. So we've seen the first 2 episodes. I suppose it's just like the 4th way you can experience The Last of Us. You've got the original game, the remaster, and the remake. and now a TV show. I think it's, from having only seen 2 episodes, probably if you haven't experienced The Last of Us at all yet, probably the best way to do it. I think it's much easier than the game.
Yeah.
And the game was always kind of much loved for how well it told its story. Remembering it was a PS3 game, so like at that time, storytelling in games was nowhere near the level of The Last of Us. Like, that's why it was such a big deal.
Yeah.
And certainly the character development, the world building, all of that, like the narrative was TV show quality, and we're finally seeing that retold in a TV show.
Yeah.
And they haven't really had to change much, at least so far, because it was already kind of at that level.
Yeah. The thing that they've changed, like a way of the infection kind of getting to people, which makes sense for a TV medium. I think it's also just because we're sick of people, watching people in masks. So, like, I don't know. That's maybe getting into spoilers.
They've made some small tweaks, but the narrative so far is pretty much shot for shot remake. Well, not shot for shot, but storyboard for storyboard. Like, it's pretty much exactly the same stories. Remember, up to the end of episode 2 at least. And I think the casting's been great. The 2 main characters are well cast. Pedro Pascal plays Joel, who you may know from The Mandalorian, is kind of where he most recently came to fame. I'm going to say with a very similar audience.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of crossover if you're into those 2 shows.
For sure.
And the whole cast is great. I can't remember
Bella
who plays
Ramsey's Ellie.
Ellie, and who plays Tess is an Australian.
Anna Torv, Australian Anna Torv. One, go watch Fringe, because it's an amazing show when she's on it. They all do such a good job, the 3 of them, the core characters, do such a good job of it. They're their own characters, but you can, like, hear a bit of, like, the Ellie tone and, like, inflection. Like, she's not trying to copy Ellie's voice as in the game by Ashley Johnson, I think it was. Like, but she's very Ellie, and, like, it's crazy how Ellie she is. And Pedro does exactly the same thing for Joel. Like, you can kind of hear Troy Baker, but it's not him doing a Troy Baker impression. It's just like
it's the essence of the characters there, but it's their own. It's an adaptation, so it's different versions of those characters, and it's probably a bit more suited for TV and comes across really well. So
I'm not sure where you'd be, like, 2 hours in playing the game, like, in terms of the story, but, like, they've taken two episodes to get to where they are, and it's still pretty early in, I think. Anna Torv, I think, out of the 3 of them, has probably impressed me the most with her acting and just the way that she's kind of made Tess. Like, it's a story about Joel and Ellie. Tess is sort of in the background, but, like, she's just done a really good job of making that character seem real, and it's just quite impressive. I really like what she's done. It's hard though, man. Like, if you've played however many versions of this game and you're watching it again, like, it's not light subject matter. So it's a bit of a slog for someone who's done it a bunch of times. My husband hasn't played the game or seen anything about it, so he's absolutely digging it. I don't know I think you've been watching it with Claire.
Similar experience, and some other people I've been speaking to about it who haven't played the game at all. And so, like, initially they didn't realize Ellie was the main character, because you have no idea going into it. It's kind of the Joel and Sarah show for the first episode, and it's a very long opening. The first episode's like movie length. It's like nearly 90 minutes. And it's because of a lot of backstory. Like, that all happens, or mostly happens, like 20 years beforehand, and it sets it up same as the game.
And then it becomes the Joel and Tess show.
And so We've had a fair bit of Ellie to the end of episode 2, but you could, if you had no idea what this story was, up until, let's say, if you cut off the last 5 minutes of episode 2, you could think it's like Ellie's maybe the 3rd character, whereas she probably actually, across the 2 games at least, she's the main character, really. So it's a different experience if you play the game, because you kind of know what's coming, you know what's going to happen to these characters. I'm keen to see if they change much else, being that they've announced, I think, just now, basically overnight, that there's going to be a season 2, and
that they want it to run for 3 seasons. So I'm not sure how they're going to break up the existing content, because Neil Druckmann's also said that it's not a Game of Thrones situation where they're going to add, like, new story to what's already from the books, or in this case the video game.
Oh, that's interesting, because having played both games, I would say the first Last of Us makes a great TV show and a great story. The second one, I think, would be a hard watch as a TV show.
It would be a very hard watch, and there's a whole bunch of logistics around, especially if it's going to be 2 seasons of that game, potentially. Even if it was 1 season, how you'd break up the story into a way that a TV audience is going to take in, and then, hopefully get to the same place that they wanted you to be in playing the game through, because it's very there's a big intent there.
Yes, and it's like the Last of Us one is carried by the Joel and Ellie relationship, so there was nothing that replaced it on that level in the second game. And so I think that's why the TV show is only going to get better from here, because you're going to get more of that Joel and Ellie combo, and they're probably going to develop more than they did in the game, a relationship with each other.
Oh yeah, big time.
And so, yeah, where they go for a season 2, we're not really at that point of discussing that yet, because we're only 2 episodes in season 1, but it's these are the type of things in your head, having played both games, as opposed to someone who's never played any of this. And a bunch of our listeners might be Switch, Xbox, PC only, if they've never played it on PlayStation. Definitely worth watching. Certainly one of the best. It's a rough, kind of gory story, but it's certainly one of the best kind of original game stories. And I know there's a lot of chat about, has this saved like adaptations of games, because normally they're bad when they move to other mediums, but not always. Like, there's some okay ones. The Halo show was okay, but it wasn't nowhere near as good as this. We've also got the Mario movie coming up, which I think is going to be a hard watch for if you're a long-time Mario fan. It's just not going to be right having Chris Pine as what's his name? Not Chris Pine, the other guy.
Chris Pratt.
One of the Chris P's as Mario instead of Charles Martinet, who we've grown up with. But again, that's for kids. It's really for a different audience. It's probably for kids who have maybe played Mario on like their 3DS with the sound off, and they have no idea that he has that voice. So these are all for different audiences. I think The Last of Us specifically is a very different watch if you play the game or not, but it's still interesting for both audiences. Yeah, and it makes way more sense to watch this TV show than like someone playing through the game or like just the cutscenes from the game. Naughty Dog, and like we were talking about it before, like Sony doesn't want to put its first party things on subscription early on because they're huge budget affairs that are basically like movies now. So I think they very much are created in a way that really lends to an adaptation on TV or film. Unless you're Uncharted, because I don't know what that movie was a thing. But, like God of War, I think is going to be very similar to what The Last of Us is going to be on TV. Because it plays like a TV show almost now. It's like scripted like that, and you go through it. And of course, yes, like there are sandbox moments where you get into an area with Last of Us with like 10 people to either kill or sneak around, which is sort of similar to a Halo where it's, go into an open area and, get the grunts, get the elites. But like, the Halo TV show tries to build some random incoherent story around like that without, just sticking to the lore and going like super duper sci-fi to its detriment, I think. Like I only finished watching the Halo series like a couple weeks ago because I just kind of put it down and forgot and didn't care. Like The Last of Us is just like it's there. It's like one big story arc. And you do play through it, but like it's more about it's the journey and the story and the gameplay. Absolutely. So it's good. They're really lending themselves to this kind of thing. So it's good to see them succeed and good to see people get involved. And maybe it'll bring people to PlayStation and playing games, which is... Well, and now we see why they did The Last of Us Part 1. I think we're talking about, did that really need that kind of remake/remaster? It was kind of on the line of which it really was when you've already kind of got the remaster that runs fine on a PS5. But now that it's like selling like hotcakes because people have started the show and realized, hey, I want to play this game too. Yep. I'm sure some of them just want to see what happens next, and it's kind of like I don't want to wait, 4 weeks to get. I do that
all the time. I buy the book when it's a TV show that I know is gonna.
And so, absolutely, I'm sure, very smart by Sony to realize that people are going to want to have the best version of this, and there's not a version of it that says PS5 on the box. Now they do have that. I would still recommend, if that's why you're playing, just play the PS4 version on your PS5. But if you really love the story, the best way to play is going to be that remaster. So play the PS5 version.
Exactly the same advice as in with Dead Space. Like if you're an absolute diehard fan, you're happy dropping the extra money to get the ultimate version of it. Great. If you are happy dropping like $15-$20 at this point to get something that's close enough, like that also is fine. There's no right or wrong.
I know Sony don't like to put things on their subscription service for at least 2 years, but it would be super smart of them to put it out like at the end of the run of this season 1 to kind of be like, now you can play it on your subscription. I think that's too early for them. I think they want to sell it more. I think more likely is when season 2 is coming around in like 18 months from now, then they'll say, and play the game now.
Yeah. Well, at least maybe discount The Last of Us Part 2 near the end of Season 1 because same idea.
It's already super cheap.
Yeah, don't release The Last of Us Part 2 remastered or I will flip my lid.
I think they will actually, because The Last of Us Part 2 is like $20 now. It's like $100 cheaper than Part 1.
There you go. So go buy that first.
Yeah, potentially. And I think that's about it for this episode. We've been back for a long time. It's our first episode of the year. We don't have anything in delays because surely nothing's been delayed except maybe Forza.
No.
Yeah, and that's pretty much it.
And I think next week we've got a bunch of things to talk about. I know we can talk about. I've been playing SpongeBob. We can talk about Dead Space. I don't know if you want to play it or not, and we can have a chat.
Yeah.
Up to you. Age of Empires 2 is on the horizon. By the time this comes out, I'm thinking in my head of dates. By the time this comes out, Age of Empires 2 is out. I've played like 5-10 minutes. We can talk about that if you want to as well. We're not big on talking about games one of us have played, so we'll figure out what we're doing. But we're back, though. That's the important news. We're back in 2023, not 13.
Yeah, and we can loop back, because I know you're all on the edge of your seat, to our holiday gaming chat that we had at the end of last year about what we're going to play. See if we actually played them. We didn't have time this week, but we'll come back to that next week. See if we all went back 10 years and how we went. But for now, that's bye from us, I think.
Yes. Thank you for having me in your home. It's lovely.
My pleasure. We'll see you next week.
Oh, I forgot to record.